Hello, everybody. We're going to start in just a few minutes. I just want to tell you that there's still some people coming in, and there's some empty seats. If you would, scooch in. It's a lot easier for people to find their seats if they don't have to go looking in the middle. If you would. Just think about it. So, I want to welcome you all here tonight. Birds on the Niagara. This is our 7th consecutive year of doing it. And this is our biggest festival, and we've got a lot of really wonderful things that are happening this year that are going to continue to be happening. One thing I want to start with is that this program here at the Burchfield is part of a Burchfield Collaborates partnership. And one of the perks for you being here tonight, if you're interested, is that you can buy a Burchfield membership for 10% discount. And I guess there's a QR code out there. If you want to do it, you can just use your phone and it'll get you a discount. I want to start by just thanking all of you for coming here tonight. This is amazing that we've got this sellout. We have the pretty amazing speaker. So thank you, all of you that are in the audience that have come here. I also want to thank a couple of other people, and some of this stuff will be running up there. This shows some of our history, some of our sponsors, some of our past programs. We have a really nice board, and I don't know how many board members are here tonight. We only have about 4 or 5, but if you are here, if you could stand up and just wave. I guess I should introduce myself, right? My name is Jay Burney, and I'm the president of the board. And Marianne Kedron, who is, I think, out there taking notes on the hallway. She's our vice president. Anna Prepera, I don't know if you're here, she's our treasurer. Marcus Roston, Ruth Goldman. That's our board. It's an important group of people who have come together and worked really hard over the last several months to make sure this happens. And there's a lot of great things happening. I'll tell you about that in a little bit. I also want to thank our Canadian partners. One of the unique things about this event is it's an international bird festival. It's the only international bird festival in North America. It's pretty cool. And our partners in Canada are such an important part of it. And I know that some of them are here today. Marcy Jacqueline. There you go. Here's Marcy. Both sides of the border have pretty robust programs, and you can go online and see our website and find out the programs that are going on now through Monday. And there's just so many neat things, including in Canada. I'm going to mention this again. The Niagara Glen is going to be having an open house on Monday, and you go there, you find out about the nature and geology work that they do. So anyway, just it's great to be international and have the opportunity to share what we're doing across the border, because wildlife, biodiversity doesn't recognize the borders. People do, and sometimes it's hard to collaborate and to cooperate with each other. But we're doing it, and what we're doing is, I'll tell you about that in a second. A couple of other things I want to appreciate here tonight. We have sponsors, and you'll see some of them up here. We have the Niagara Falls National Heritage Area. We have Buffalo Ornithological Society. We have commercial sponsors like Swarovski Optic, Kawa, and Vortex. We have Pollinator Conservation Association. There's probably a few others. Western New York Land Conservancy. They've all donated money and time to help us. Really importantly, our volunteers. We have a lot of volunteers that have worked to make this possible on both sides of the border. And if you're a volunteer for this event, stand up. Let's applause. If you're not here tonight, you're not here tonight. But we have a lot of volunteers that have made this really important. Okay. I want to tell you a little bit about our festival. We created this 7 years ago, and there's a number of things that we decided to make ourselves about. First, birds in the Niagara. This is an incredible bird place, especially in the wintertime, but all year round. It's a globally significant, important bird area. Now that's a designation that is an international recognition because of the science that makes us important to birds. We have birds, for instance, in the wintertime right now out on the river that come here from the Arctic. They depend on this area. Now, most winters, or many winters, or some past winters, say that because of climate change, this has been the first open water when birds are coming from the north. So you get a lot of waterfowl, ducks and geese, and swans like tundra swans. They come here in massive numbers. They find the open waters. They find food. They find companionship. They socialize. And also, this is the time of the year, coincidentally, just around Valentine's Day, where a lot of them are in breeding activity. They have breeding plumage, so you see these beautiful birds out there. And they're doing breeding dances and sort of getting to know each other, and it's fun to watch. And so in the wintertime, birds from the north come here in numbers you hardly find anywhere else on the planet. And it's true. So this is an important area. We're in the Great Lakes, 20% of the fresh surface water. Birds come here. In the winter, this is like the Miami of many birds that come from the far north. And they're just loving it. I mean, if you're out there today, there's a lot of birds out there diving and eating, and you know, man, I'm out there. They're loving it. It's Miami. In other seasons, we have migrants that come from places like the Amazon, Central America, the Caribbean, the Amazon. Birds come through here in the summer. That winter, right now they're in the Amazon. They come here and they breed here. And so conserving our areas is really important. When you talk about or think about how do we save the earth, which is part of our message, how do we conserve? Because the second part besides birds is conservation. We want to save the Amazon? Sure, everybody wants to save the Amazon. You want to save the Arctic? Yeah, we have to save here. We have to do conservation here because we contribute so much to the biodiversity of places like the Amazon, the Arctic, the Northwest Boreal coasts. A lot of birds come here, depend on this area. And so our next big message is conservation. And we have a lot of programs that talk about conservation. What places do we need to conserve? How do we do it? What are we not doing? And so a lot of our discussions are about making sure that we have an understanding and a conversation and action towards conserving this area. And a lot of our programs are about that, and a lot of our partners are about that. The other major message that we try to do here involves social justice. We understand political borders, and sometimes those borders are difficult for different cultures to cross. And we have, birds from Mexico. We have butterflies from Mexico. We have migrants, and we have a connection to those cultures that are all over the globe, all over the hemisphere. And so that cultural connection is something that we think about in terms of social justice. We also recognize that there are a lot of different cultures that are here that don't always have the kind of voice that we think should be at the table. Indigenous people, people of color, LGBTQ people. We want to make sure that we are collaborating with a lot of voices, because if we're going to move forward into the future, we want something for our children, our collective culture's children and grandchildren. If we don't work together, it's going to be a lot harder to make sure that we have a future that everyone can feel good about and survive in. Survival. So the last thing that I want to talk about before I introduce our keynote is this region. The Niagara River Corridor, the IBA, it's also a Ramsar Wetlands International Importance. Great Lakes, 20% of the Earth's fresh surface water is here. That's a big responsibility for us. We're a corridor, a strait. It's not actually a river, it's a strait that goes from the western Great Lakes to the eastern Great Lakes, Lake Erie to Lake Ontario. It's a natural corridor that all sorts of migrations happen. You get fish migrations, you get bird migrations, you get insect migrations like the monarch butterfly that comes through here in abundance in the right season going on its way to Mexico. Conservation, connections. This place is so important. And we hope to help inspire you all to not only know about that and think about that, but help us figure out how to solve the future. And I guess that's it. That's why we're here, and that's why we do what we do. And I so much appreciate that you're all here. I appreciate everyone that's working on this with us, because we're going to make the future work. It ain't looking good a lot of times, but if you think about it, what can we do? There's a lot we can do. We can work together, and we can do things like this festival. And thank you. About 5 minutes, but maybe our keynoter is ready to come up and start the presentation. I think he's saying yes. So, why don't you come on up here? I'm going to say, this. He doesn't need an introduction. Everyone knows who David Sibley is, and he's been here today and last night, and he did an art workshop for artists today. He did a student meet and greet, and now he's going to be here to talk to us about who he is and what he does, and he's going to do a book signing afterwards. If you need a book, we're still selling them out there, and he'll be signing afterwards. Where'd you go? There you go. It's the bright lights.
Well, thank you, Jay. It's great to be here and to see such a nice big crowd of bird watchers. It's one that, I spent most of my life traveling around watching birds, and one of the nicest, most fun, most, reassuring things is going wherever I go in the United States and Canada. There is a community of bird watchers. And if you stop to talk to people and ask them about their favorite birding spots, they're always great, really excited things about the birds that are right here. This Niagara Falls, this Niagara River here is really an extraordinary area, but it's really true that wherever you go, you'll see extraordinary birds. It's one of the things that makes bird watching so much fun. But it's just a real pleasure for me to travel to places like this and see a thriving community of bird watchers really appreciating the extraordinary bird life and environment that you have here. So it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to talk tonight about a little bit about my life story, my how I got into all of this, my approach to drawing, how the field guide came to be, and a little bit about birds in general. So I have been a bird watcher most of my life and drawing birds for most of my life. My father's an ornithologist. That probably had something to do with my interest, but I think I just had an interest and then had the good fortune to have an ornithologist for a father who could create all kinds of opportunities so my interest was encouraged and nurtured, and for me, drawing was always a big part of what I do. People often ask me if the drawing or the birding came first. They came together, and they've never been separate. And this is a duckhawk, a peregrine falcon, it's now called. This is a drawing I did when I was about 8 years old. I think mostly copied from a book, which is a lot of what I did then. But I started drawing birds from life around that time, sketching birds in the field, and spent a lot of time doing that. This is me at about 12 years old with a sharp-tailed sparrow, or what's now called salt marsh sparrow. So my father and my brother and I did a lot of bird banding when I was young, and this is a day of catching salt marsh sparrows out in the marsh. And that was also, the bird banding, I think, watching birds through binoculars is a little abstract for kids. But holding a bird in your hand, there's nothing like it, really. It's just a magical experience. So I think the opportunity to be involved with bird banding made the birds really real to me. It gave me a whole different perspective on them. And throughout my childhood and into my 20s, bird banding was a really important part of what I did. And the drawing, drawing is more than just, well, for me, it's not really art, it's information. And drawing, there's a quote that I like from a book about drawing by Peter Steinhardt. He wrote, "A drawing is a picture of your understanding," which really rang true to me the first time I read it. And for me, drawing is all about understanding birds. And the more I draw, the more I understand. And the more I understand, the better my drawings are. So it really reinforces in both directions. And I would say things like, I don't feel like I've really seen a bird until I've drawn it, which you'll hear people say things like that, but that's what that means. It's so this is the first white-winged crossbill that I ever saw in Connecticut. Right near our house in Connecticut, it was coming to a bird feeder, and we went to see it. And I could have looked at it. It has a crossed bill, and it has white in the wings, so it's a white-winged crossbill. Checked it off on my life list and moved on, but I wanted to draw it. And the drawing, even this fairly simple outline drawing, probably took about 20 minutes of watching and sort of back and forth. I've sometimes described drawing as like a one-sided interview with the bird. You ask questions, you get the answers, you write down the answers on the paper, you think of another question, you ask that one. So you have to really look at the bird and say, what shape is the head? The bill is crossed, but how much? And what's the shape of the bill? How big is the bill relative to the head? What shape are the white markings in the wings? How many are there? All these questions about the shape, the proportions, the markings, that drawing forces you to look at all of that, to really pay attention to all those details. And by paying attention to the details, you get a better sense of the whole bird. You really remember it then. So this is why I would say I feel like I've never really seen a bird until I've drawn it. Here's another set of drawings of what's now called blue-headed vireo. It was solitary vireo then. This is a bird that we caught and banded, and I held it for a few minutes and did the quick sketches, some of the sketches on the left. And the one at the upper left you can see is a typical bander's view of a blue-headed vireo. And then I did the watercolor painting on the right at home. I've never done much painting in the field. I do pencil sketches in the field, and mostly watching and a few pencil sketches. The paintings I do back at home in the studio, and based on my sketches, as you can see, this one is just copying over the sketch from the left and then coloring it. At around the same time, in my early teens, I had an interest in books as well. I just enjoyed the feeling, the process of gathering information and compiling it into a book. And this is a book that I worked on called The Warblers of Connecticut, that was produced in a limited print run of one. Made on my father's typewriter and with photographs of banded birds pasted in and some of my sketches, drawings. But this, you could see where even at that age, I just enjoyed the whole idea of producing a book. And I think back on it now that my father's an ornithologist. Almost every adult that I knew all of my father's friends and colleagues, the people we hung out with on the weekends, everyone was a birder. They all used field guides and talked about field guides. Roger Torrey Peterson lived about 20 miles away from us in Connecticut, and of course had made a very successful career writing field guides. And I met him a couple of times. He was very encouraging of my interest. So it seemed to me as a kid that writing a field guide was a perfectly viable career path, and just one of those, something people might do. And that's what I wanted to do. So I went to college for about a year, and then decided that it wasn't getting me any closer to producing a field guide. So I got a job at Cape May counting hawks that next fall, and never really looked back. I worked at Cape May. I started traveling all over the country. I ended up leading birdwatching tours for a living, but traveling most of the time just birding and sketching. This is a photograph of me in the back of a friend's car in Maine, sketching a hawk owl that was spending the winter in way down east Maine. And I'll get back to that hawk owl in a minute, but I wanted to show a sort of a timeline of my hawk owl sketches over the years. This is the first hawk owl I ever saw, and this was within a month of my first white-winged crossbill that I showed you a minute ago. So this was near my grandparents' house in upstate New York. Well, we're in upstate New York, I should say. It's near Ithaca, as it says. So this hawk owl, it was in a known location. We drove up, looked at it for a few minutes, and drove away. This is the drawing that I did as we were driving away. And so a very quick, just memories of what I had just seen. The lower sketch here is to emphasize one of the things that I noticed while we were watching that hawk owl, that you never see its feet. The feet are always completely hidden under the feathers. The next hawk owl that I saw was in Maine, in Portland, Maine. It's about 7 years later. This is just at the beginning of my full-time birding and traveling and sketching. And this hawk owl, I went to see it a couple of times. This is the first sketch on the first day. And going back to the idea that a drawing is a picture of your understanding, here I don't know hawk owl very well. I'm just beginning to sort of learn what a hawk owl looks like. So I'm testing out different lines, different shapes. I liked the one on the lower right, so I circled it. After a few more hours of watching and a few other pages of sketches, I did this, which is getting better, learning what a hawk owl, how the bird is shaped, how the markings fit into that shape. I went back a few days later and spent a couple of hours just doing this drawing. This is my in-depth interview with the hawk owl. Just trying to look at every detail, every part of the hawk owl, and put it all on paper. There's a lot of erasing in this, a lot of looking at the bird for 5 minutes, looking down at the drawing, looking back at the bird, looking at the drawing, erasing a little, adding a little. And I'm not, this sketch, to me, it looks sort of stiff and formal, not very lively. But the process of doing this sketch is what taught me all about hawk owls. I learned so much doing this sketch. And that's the real value of sketching, I would say, in the same theme, that sketching is not about the finished product, it's about the process and the information, the learning that comes from that process. Most of my sketches I never look at again. I watch the bird, I do a drawing in the field, and I file that away, and and maybe never look at it again. But the value of it is in the moment, in that the things that I learn while I'm watching and doing that sketch. So after this couple of hours doing this, and then a couple more hours watching the hawk owl and doing more sketches, I was able to do sketches like this. And really, the other thing about drawing is it's about simplifying. You're trying to take a living, breathing bird with a very complex pattern in 3 dimensions and convert that into 2-dimensional lines on a sheet of paper, and figuring out which lines are critical, which lines and shapes represent that bird in 2 dimensions is really what you're learning when you draw. So this, I'm getting a lot closer to the sort of the essence of the hawk owl in pencil lines. And then 7 years later, after 7 years of essentially full-time traveling, birding, and sketching, there's another hawk owl in Maine. This was the one I'm sitting in the back of my friend's car sketching. And again, we spent a couple of days around this hawk owl, kind of visiting it multiple times, and I did a bunch of sketches. And this one, it's not really fair to call this a sketch. This is a fully realized penciled drawing, which I almost never do in the field, but hawk owls make such great subjects because they'll sit still for hours on one perch. You can just aim the telescope at them and sit there with your drawing pad, and every time you look in the scope, you know the bird's still going to be there. So that's just sort of the timeline of my sketches. And going back a little bit, this is about the same time, this is early 1980s, about the same time as my second hawk owl. A series of hawks in flight at Cape May. And again, there's a lot of experimentation in this sketch. I'm watching these 3 species of buteos overhead, broad-winged at the top, red-tailed in the middle, and 2 red-shouldereds at the bottom. And I'm trying to, in these sketches, just trying to capture the differences in the wing shapes, tail shapes, body proportions, and the very broad wing patterns. But again, lots of sort of experimental lines, a lot of erasing, testing different lines. This is also right around the same time, Leach's storm petrels from the Blue Nose Ferry from Maine to Nova Scotia. And again, lots of experimentation. There's drawings here that are crossed out or scribbled out. There's drawings started and not finished. Lots of extra lines that sort of trying to capture something. But again, it's all about learning. I know that somewhere in here, even if I did one sketch and didn't like it and added another line, that's enough to add that other line and say, oh, that looks better. I'll do it that way the next time. And this is about 7 years later in Texas, watching warblers in the spring on the Texas coast, black and white warblers, and multiple birds. This would have been sort of wandering around in the woods at High Island in Texas, and during the course of the morning, seeing maybe 20 or 30 black and white warblers. And I would start with just a couple of different poses, and then each time I saw a black and white warbler, look at some details, notice something, and go back and maybe add a different pose or add some details to these. But it's 2 males on the left and a female on the right, so you know it's at least 2 different individuals. And this sketch is a gray flycatcher. It's one of the Empidonax flycatchers that I drew in Arizona in 1989. And this was right around the time, so I'd been, at this point, traveling, birding, traveling, sketching full-time for 9 years. And this was the point, right around this sketch, I remember this sketch, looking at it and being very satisfied with this drawing, that I felt like I was capturing in a very simple pencil drawing the shape and character of a gray flycatcher that distinguishes it from the other Empidonax flycatchers. And I felt like what I had been working towards was getting proficient enough at drawing the birds of North America to be able to start on a field guide. And this is the point where I said, yes, I'm ready. And then it was 4 or 5 more years before I actually started the final draft. But so through the 1980s, while I was doing all that traveling, I was supporting myself partly with leading bird tours, partly with selling artwork and either one-time fees for publication or originals. But I was doing a lot of black and white artwork for publication then, because almost everything that was printed was black and white, not color. So pen and ink was a medium that I really enjoyed. And it's, when I say that drawing involves simplifying a bird, pen and ink means simplifying it even more. At least with a pencil drawing, you have gray to work with, shades of gray. But pen and ink is just black and white, black lines on white paper. And I personally really enjoyed that challenge. And this is a Pyrrholoxia. It's a southwestern relative of the cardinal. But figuring out how to create an image that is recognizably and realistically a Pyrrholoxia in black on white is it's a real challenge, but something that I really enjoyed. And I haven't done much black and white work since the 1980s, but I do really enjoy it. But that doing a lot of black and white pen and ink work also led me to illustrate the book called Hawks in Flight, which was written by Pete Dunn and also collaborated with Clay Sutton at Cape May. This book came out in the late 1980s, and I did a lot, I don't remember how many, a couple hundred drawings like this of hawks in flight, emphasizing the shapes and the patterns, just like those sketches that I showed a minute ago. So that was my first experience in publishing a bird guide, and I learned a few things from that helped me later on, but it was a great challenge to illustrate all the hawks in black and white. So as I started thinking about my own field guide, I looked, all my life I had used field guides and studied bird illustration. This is one of my all-time favorites, one of my favorite artists, favorite field guides, and favorite plate from that field guide. It's Don Eckelberry, who worked mostly in the 1950s to 70s. He illustrated the Audubon Bird Guide, which some of you probably have, and it's easy to find used copies. So this is the Audubon Water Bird Guide. And he had such a fantastic style of simplifying the birds, these beautifully simple paintings of birds, but at the same time capturing perfectly the shape, sort of the bulk, they just look like real birds. But when you look for details, you're not going to find a lot of detail. It's just precision. And imagine that these paintings were done in the 1950s, before there was even much photography to look at for reference. And on top of that, these plates were designed and painted as you see them. There's no digital collage going on here. This is the original painting looks just like what you see on these 2 pages. It's just amazing that he was doing this work. It's now 70 years ago. So that was the field guide that I held up as just incredible artwork until I met this book, The Birds of Europe by Lars Jonsson. He's a Swedish artist and just an extraordinary ability to capture the look and the essence of birds in paint. So those were the field guides that I admired the most and held up as sort of the icons of bird illustration. And when I started working on my own field guide, I started working on paintings like this. This was one of my early drafts for common loon and yellow-billed loon. The birds doing different things in different poses, big, detailed illustrations. And I worked on this for a couple of years and did quite a few of these paintings, which was good practice, but ended up, none of them ended up being used in the book. One problem was that it made designing the page very difficult. I had to figure out which plumages I was going to illustrate, where they would go, what pose they would be in, how they would compare to the ones next to them, where they would overlap, and all of that was just very, very complex. So it was taking way too much time to figure out what would go on each page, and then I kept running out of room. So here, I didn't leave enough room for the breeding plumaged loons. So, and then I realized another issue with this kind of artistic rendering of the birds is like the common loon in the middle at the top with the water droplets on its head, like it has just surfaced from a dive. The field guide reading public could look at that and sort of make their own deduction and say, oh, a loon with water droplets on its head is a common loon. Yellow-billed loon doesn't have that. So there's all those little pitfalls you have to watch out for. And I went back to the original Peterson field guide, which was just very simple diagrams, basically, of birds in similar poses, all facing the same direction, all doing exactly the same thing. So every difference is highlighted. The differences in size and tail length and head pattern, it jumps right out because there's nothing else going on in the illustration. And I went back to thinking about one of my own sketches. This is Costas and black-chinned hummingbirds, females in Arizona. It's again in 1989. And when I woke up on that morning in 1989, I didn't really have a good sense of how to distinguish female Costas and black-chinned hummingbirds. Nobody really did. They were very difficult to distinguish, very similar in appearance. And as I started out that morning with my sketchbook, I found a patch of flowers, and there were a few hummingbirds visiting, and it didn't take long to realize that they weren't all black chins. It was two species, and some female Costas and some female black chins. And I noticed a difference in the length and shape of the bill. That was the first thing I noticed. So I started a sketch starting with the bill shape and watching the birds and realizing, oh, I think there's a difference in the head shape also. And as I sketch in the head, trying to get the right representation of the differences in head shape, that leads me to notice that, there's a difference in the neck as well, a difference in the way they sit, a difference in the wing shape, in the tail length, the head pattern. And by the time I had finished, after a couple of hours of watching and sketching, I had this list on the right there of 10 differences between these species and a perfect understanding of how to distinguish female Costas and black-chinned hummingbirds. And they've always seemed fairly obvious to me ever since. But it occurred to me that if you wanted a field guide to distinguishing female black-chinned and Costas hummingbirds, this is what you need. Color doesn't come into the picture at all. It's just shape and proportions and posture, and sort of black and white color values. But those things, looking at the Peterson Guide and some other books and this kind of experience, led me to think that simplifying the field guide was the way to go, that I should give up on the artistic vision that I had of reproducing the Eckelberry or Lars Johnson style and go back to the Peterson style, which is what I did. So I ended up, the loons instead look like this on their finished page. So all the different plumages are there, all in the same pose, all lined up so they're easy to compare. And all of the differences stand out, and the whole range of variation stands out. And that, when I came up with this plan, then I knew this was 1993. And then I knew I was ready to start on the final draft. And in another 6 years, the book was done. This is what my painting table looks like in my studio when I'm working on, beginning to work on a painting. This was, it looks different now because now most of my reference material is online. But this was back in the days when I was using slides and books and all of my old notes and sketches. So here looking at ferruginous hawk and rough-legged hawk, and I would just, before I started on the painting, pull out all my reference material, go through it all, get a good sense of the differences and the appearance of the species, and then start the painting. This is shows a sort of before and after. This is a Baikal teal that I painted for the second edition of the guide, and this would be the relatively simple pencil outline that I would start with, and the finished painting. So for my style, I found that the best way to start is just with an outline. The outline has to be right. It has to be the right proportions and the right posture. But starting with just the outline and then filling in all the details with paint allowed me to make a lot of adjustments along the way to fix any little problems with the outline, or to just to make things look right as I went along. So I didn't do a lot of preparatory work. All the detail showed up during the painting. And here I have a series of images showing the progress of one painting of this is a saw-whet owl, but the Haida Gwaii subspecies from off the coast of British Columbia. And this would have started as a simple pencil outline like the teal that I just showed. This is, I didn't start photographing until I was partway into it. So this is already multiple layers of paint. I start with a light gray shadow, just to sort of start to delineate the form of the bird, and then add layers of light color, layers of dark color, building up these thin, transparent layers of watercolor. And then adding more details around the eyes and the head, a little more detail all around. Filling in the eyes and all around the head and the streaks on the body, and then finally more detail and a little bit of white added, transparent white on the shoulders and other places for a little sheen of highlights to give it a little more three-dimensional form. And this is the painting that appears in the field guide. It's reduced in the field guide to about an inch and a half tall. The original painting is probably 6 or 7 inches tall, nearly life size. So while there isn't a lot of detail in the original painting, it allows me to use a big brush, to work quickly, to not worry too much about going over the line by a little bit here or there. And then once it's reduced in the guide, it actually looks a lot more carefully painted and detailed. This is what a couple of the actual original sheets of paper look like from the field guide, with the ruddy ground dove, common ground dove, Inca dove, spotted dove on the right. So they're big, like 15 by 22 inch sheets of paper. And I just lay out all the birds on that paper and paint a whole species at once. And I could paint, when I was really in the flow, it would take about an hour to do an individual image. So one of these pages, maybe 12 hours, something like that. And this, of course, is how it all got put together in the book, all digitally assembled with the images surrounded by text. And as many of you probably know, once the bird guide was done, I took a little detour into trees for about 7 years. I did a guide to trees, which when the bird guide was done, I wanted a big project. I wanted another big, all-encompassing project. I didn't want to just go deeper into some aspect of birds. And I actually started working on a guide to butterflies of North America, which a lot of my friends had gotten into butterflies. I had always enjoyed butterfly identification. It seemed like a natural direction to go. There's about as many species of butterflies in North America as there are birds. But once I started working on it, I realized that there may be about the same number of species, but a much higher percentage of the butterfly species are only found on the southern border of the United States. And in Massachusetts, where I live, there are really only about 50 species of butterflies that you can expect to find, and only about 15 of those you see regularly. The others you really have to make an effort to see. So it wasn't very practical to work on a field guide to 800 species of butterflies when I was only going to see 15 of them with any regularity. And as I was figuring all that out, I realized I was actually taking my kids to their soccer practice and other things and walking around the soccer field while they were doing their thing, and realizing that I was surrounded by trees, and that I would be able to actually work on a tree guide at the same time I was doing all kinds of other things. Studying trees, I mean, we all have trees and birds in our yard. We have trees along the roadside. We have, you see trees everywhere you go, and you see them from a distance. You can identify them from a distance. They change with the seasons, and there's a lot of diversity of trees everywhere you go. So in a funny way, tree watching turned out to be the most similar kind of nature study to bird watching, aside from the fact that the trees don't move, which, as I like to say, nobody ever, you have a bird feeder in your yard because it's exciting to see what birds show up, but nobody ever woke up in the morning and wondered what tree they were going to see when they looked out their kitchen window. I did the guide to trees. I thought the tree guides that I had used in the past were always kind of frustrating to me. They're so sort of opaque and botanical, and I wanted a tree guide that was more like a modern bird guide, that really just showed me a lot of pictures and emphasized the similarities between what makes a maple, what makes an oak, those kinds of things. So anyway, that was my goal with the tree guide. It was a great project, a really interesting detour for a few years, and since then I have been fully invested in birds again. My latest detour is into digital art. I started doing experimenting with digital painting about 3 years ago on the iPad. The iPad with Apple Pencil is a very natural feeling drawing experience, and it made painting really fun again for me. There's so much you can do so easily, and this work in particular, this was one of the first projects I took on with digital illustration, because illustrating iridescence with paint on paper is really close to impossible. It's extremely difficult to get the sheen, the subtle changes in colors across that sheen, the subtle variations between different individuals, different subspecies. All of this, if I had tried to do these illustrations on paper, it would have taken months of effort and hundreds of drafts, and I probably still wouldn't have been happy with the result. But working digitally allowed me to do all this, to experiment with all this. And the thing that I realized about it is, I talked about how drawing for me is it's an experiment, it's an exploration, and the process is the benefit of it. But painting was always about the product, and about, you really, with watercolor especially, you get one shot to do it right. And there's always a risk of going too far and putting too much paint on, and then so part of successful watercolor painting is knowing when to stop. But that doesn't leave any room for experimentation. But working in digital painting, it turns this kind of detailed color work into an experiment. I can actually experiment with different variations of colors, different shadings, different areas of color. So I could do this project on variation in common grackles by just testing out different things on the artwork, and it was really liberating. So that's been a really fun thing, and I'm working on a lot of other digital illustrations, like these subspecies of Steller's jays. And so that's where a lot of my latest project, not a formal project, but just I guess I could call it my hobby. I can't really pull myself away from it, but I keep doing these detailed explorations of variation in North American birds, because the digital artwork makes it so interesting to do that. And I'll turn back to so my career, I would say, is sort of I think of it in sort of 3 stages. When I started birding was all about the chase, the treasure hunt aspect of trying to find new species, seeing what's around the next corner, when is the first magnolia warbler going to show up, and that excitement of just the birds themselves moving around and finding all of them and getting to know all of them was my focus. And drawing was the way to experience all of that, but my focus was really on the birding, the sport of it. Once I had seen most of the birds and started thinking more about the field guide, my focus turned to the sort of more academic study of what makes each species different. So I set out to try to learn what is it that is unique to every species? What makes a savanna sparrow, as opposed to a song sparrow or a vesper sparrow? So every little detail I was trying to to learn and catalog and draw and note. And that all went into the field guide. And now that the field guide has been done and revised, my interest turned more to bird behavior and sort of what birds are doing, how they do it, and why, which led me to my newest book that came out in 2020 called What It's Like to Be a Bird. That book started out as it was meant to be a kid's guide to birds, a kid's field guide. And but I wanted to explain a little bit about what birds are doing, just sort of give a sense of what a bird's life is like. And as I started doing the research on that, there were so many things that I learned, things I thought I knew, but that I had learned wrong, and so much was new and amazing to me that then those short essays and explanations became the entire book. So it's not really a field guide in any sense. It's just a book about birds' superpowers. I'll just point out a few of those here. Some of the more remarkable things that I learned along the way. So this is a killdeer, which is a familiar bird for most people. They nest on the ground, and they're very noisy. And they do the broken wing act to lure predators away from their nest. They pretend to have a broken wing, and when you follow them, they lead you along, and then at some point just take off and fly and circle back to their nest when it's safe. So they nest on the open ground, just lay their eggs on bare gravel. And their eggs are extremely camouflaged, cryptically colored, so they're hard to see. The adult bird has this cryptic coloration, the neck rings and patterns that sort of break up the outline of the bird to make it hard to see when it's sitting on the ground. And then they have behavior like the broken wing act to help protect the nest, but all of that is visual protection. And I thought, how do they avoid predators like skunks or foxes that hunt at night, mostly by smell? So it turns out that birds have an oil that they preen into their feathers. They produce an oil that helps to protect their feathers. During the breeding season, ground nesting birds like killdeers, the composition of that oil changes to something that is odorless, undetectable by mammals. So during the nesting season, they lose their scent. And the researchers tested this by taking samples of the two different preen oils and placing them around in a big warehouse and then sending some hunting dogs in. And the dogs found all of the non-breeding season samples and didn't find the breeding season samples. So there's an adaptation that keeps these birds safe when they're sitting on their nest, and I had no idea that was going on. And like so many other things that we learn about birds, it also just leads to more questions, like it seems like a really handy thing to be odorless. Why don't they use it year-round? And nobody knows. That would be a good research project for someone to take on, but it might be that it's more expensive to produce, or maybe it's not as good at protecting the feathers, or maybe it's tricky because they smell one way through most of the year, and then it might not be completely odorless, but just not smell like a killdeer, but who knows? Anyway, it's like so many things, it just leads to more mysteries. The barn owl is all the owls have incredible hearing. The barn owl has been the subject of some tests in a controlled setting and has just unbelievable hearing ability. These experiments were done in the 1960s, I think. And the researchers built a big room that could be completely black, like absolutely no light at all. And they had a perch for the barn owl at one end of the room. They would release a mouse into the room at the other end, and the barn owl would fly across this completely dark room and pinpoint the mouse and land on it and catch it in total darkness. And even more remarkably, the owl would hear the mouse moving, then wait for the mouse to stop moving before it took off from its perch, and then land on the mouse. And the owl, its talons, owls have sort of a flexible arrangement of talons, but sort of two in front, two behind. But with the 2 feet together, they form an oval pattern like this, with the 2 feet together. And they would orient their attack in total darkness to land on the body of the mouse, whatever way the mouse was oriented. So they had heard what direction the mouse was moving and apparently guessed from that which way the mouse was facing and how they should orient their talons to land on the entire body of the mouse. All that happening in total darkness. And I say, again, it's an incredible ability, but there are still a lot of unanswered questions. Like, we calculate the direction of a sound by the difference in time of that sound reaching our 2 ears. So we can calculate the direction in the horizontal plane. We don't have much sense of how high or low a sound is. If you're listening to a bird and you want to know how high it is in the tree, you turn your head like this, and then you'll be able to tell whether it's on the ground or in the top of the tree. But the owls, their ears are on either side of their head, and also one is higher than the other and points down, the others are higher and points up, lower and points down, so they're getting a full 3-dimensional sense of the direction of a sound. But even then, that owl in that room is hearing a mouse. It knows the exact direction to it, but it can't know how far it is. And apparently if the owls, when they're in total darkness and they can't see the mouse, their line of attack would be to fly horizontally across the room until they were above the mouse and then drop down onto it, which seems like the most difficult way to do it. If they could see the mouse, then they just go in a straight line directly to it. But when they can't see it, if it's total darkness, they apparently fly horizontally the right distance and then drop down. And again, nobody knows how they do all that. And various other alternatives were ruled out. They're not sensing heat. They're not sensing other things. When the researchers attached a dried leaf to the tip of the mouse's tail, so the noise came from the dried leaf and not from the mouse, the owls landed on the leaf, not on the body of the mouse. So they're tracking the sound and getting a lot more information from that than we can imagine. I like to compare it to, we're all familiar with waking up in the middle of the night and trying to walk across your bedroom in total darkness, and it's your room. You should know your way around, but you still bump into things. Imagine walking across that room and putting your hand directly on the doorknob on the far side of the room. And now imagine floating up out of your bed, floating across the room, and putting your hand directly on the doorknob, which is what the barn owl is doing. So more mysteries. And I'll just finish up with one more mystery. This is a chimney swift. It's a very common summer bird in this region, all across eastern North America, a really common summer bird, and they do nest in chimneys, as their name implies. Since the old-growth forests got cut down and a lot of chimneys have been built, they nest almost exclusively in chimneys. So they're around people and towns and houses all the time. We hear them and see them daily. And one of the big mysteries about chimney swifts is what they do all day. They nest in the chimney, and they forage up in the sky. We see them fly out of the chimney and fly away, and then they basically disappear. It's rare to see a chimney swift just out and about in the summer. Sometimes on a cold, rainy day, you'll see them down low over ponds or rivers when the insects are forced down there. But basically, you don't see chimney swifts during the daytime. Obviously, they're going up into the sky and catching what they eat up there, but nobody knows if they go directly up above their nesting chimney and circle around, or if they fly 30 miles away, if they go up to 5,000 feet or 20,000 feet. It's all a mystery. Apparently, there are a lot of baby spiders up at 10,000 feet and above. Those little just hatched spiders on their little silks that get carried up by the wind. Apparently, if you drag a plankton net up at 10,000 feet, you catch a lot of baby spiders. And I think that's what chimney swifts are eating, is apparently a lot of baby spiders. But again, it's such a common bird. You would think we already know everything about it, but such basic facts about the life of a chimney swift are completely unknown. And that, through my whole life, all the different phases of my bird study, the one thing that has never changed is my fascination with birds and the excitement and the pleasure of just watching them and figuring things out. And I think that the evidence is that will never change, that there are still so many mysteries, so many things to learn about birds, and so many new things to discover, even in our own backyards. It just takes asking the right questions and being a careful and curious observer. And anyone could make a real contribution to ornithology just by taking the time and the asking the right questions. And that, to me, is what makes bird watching so special and so much fun. Is just that sense of discovery, that there's always something new to find, there's always something to see. And it gives me a lot of satisfaction to know that my books have helped to introduce a lot of people to that and to help you along in that journey. There's just a lot of pleasure and satisfaction in getting to know the natural world, and I'm happy to have helped you all along with that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, David. And I'm going to tell you what we're going to do next. But before I do that, We have a tradition at Birds of the Niagara. Every one of our keynote speakers has gotten the same gift. And I'm going to share it with you.
Oh,
So,
beautiful. I love that photograph. I noticed this photograph in the slideshow. I love it. Yeah.
so this is a photograph. This is a photograph of a little gull on the Niagara River. I took a few years ago, but every one of our keynotes has received this, and thank you so much for.
Thank you.